when Karen used ChatGPT. Instead of her Monument Valley guide, it killed her. The temperature at Monument Valley's trailhead hit 110 degrees Fahrenheit by 9 a.m. that morning. Not warm, not hot. The kind of heat that makes the air above the red sand shimmer like something alive, that turns a 2-hour hike into a survival calculation. It is the kind of heat that does not feel dangerous at first, because danger is supposed to announce itself, and a clear blue sky over red rock looks like a postcard, not a warning. Karen had done everything right, or everything she thought was right. She'd spent 3 weeks planning this trip. She'd asked ChatGPT for the best route through the Navajo Nation's iconic sandstone buttes, the water stops, the timing, the mileage. The algorithm answered with confident, specific detail, the kind of detail that feels like expertise. It did not hedge. It did not say, "I'm not sure." It produced a clean, ordered plan with the calm authority of something that has never once been wrong about anything, because it has no memory of being wrong and no body to be wrong with. She downloaded a hiking app that placed a bold red arrow across her screen, pointing her path through the desert like a promise. She even booked a Navajo guide, not because she wanted one, because the law required it. And when that guide met her at the trailhead, a man whose family had walked this land for generations, he said something she didn't write down, something she dismissed before he finished the sentence. Here's the question that will haunt everything that follows. What does it actually mean to be prepared? Because Karen was, by every measure she could see, extraordinarily prepared. She had more information in her hand that morning than any explorer who crossed this desert a century ago could have assembled in a lifetime. And it was not enough. It was worse than not enough. The shape of her preparation was the exact shape of her undoing. What ChatGPT gave Karen looked, on the surface, like genuine expertise. A structured itinerary, mileage estimates, a water recommendation of roughly half a liter per mile, a figure that holds up reasonably well in moderate conditions, at moderate exertion, on a moderate day. Monument Valley in July is none of those things. Here's what the algorithm couldn't know. Sandstone doesn't just absorb heat, it stores it, then radiates it back upward from below. You're not standing in 110-degree air. You're standing between two heat sources, the sun above and the rock beneath, and the rock has been charging since dawn. Researchers studying desert hiking physiology have found that radiant ground heat can push effective body temperature exposure 15 to 20 degrees above ambient air temperature, which means Karen's body wasn't calculating a 110-degree hike. It was calculating something closer to 130. At that level of exposure, the body's cooling system enters a losing race. Sweat is the only mechanism a human has to shed heat in those conditions, and sweating at altitude in bone-dry desert air can run past 1 liter an hour without you ever feeling wet, because the moisture evaporates the instant it surfaces. Half a liter per mile on terrain that slows you to a crawl does not come close to replacement. The deficit does not feel like thirst at first. It feels like a headache, then like irritation, then like a strange, dreamy difficulty making simple decisions, which is precisely the moment a person most needs to make a good one. Heat illness does not politely wait at the door. It comes in through the part of the brain you would use to recognize it. And there is a threshold somewhere in that progression that changes everything. As long as the body can still sweat and still move blood to the skin, it is fighting a losing battle, but still fighting. Past a certain core temperature, that system stops working, the sweating slows, the skin goes dry, and the heat that was being shed now simply accumulates. The line between uncomfortable and struggling and in genuine danger is not gradual and obvious. It is a cliff, and people walk off it while still believing they are merely tired. The cruelest detail is that crossing it impairs exactly the judgment required to realize you've crossed it. By the time the situation is unmistakable, the person inside it is often the last to understand what is happening to them. The app's red arrow cuts straight across open rock, no shade markers, no notation that certain stretches become functionally impassable after 11 a.m. when the sun angle eliminates every shadow. No water sources flagged because the app didn't know they existed. The arrow was confident, and it was precise, and it was pointed with total certainty at a line drawn by software that had never felt heat in its life. The guide knew all of this. He tried to tell her. So why didn't she listen? His name hasn't been made public. The Navajo Nation has protected his identity with quiet dignity throughout this story. But what is known about him is worth sitting with for a moment. He was a licensed, authorized guide on Navajo Nation land. That license isn't ceremonial. It exists because people have died out here before, and the nation responded by creating a system, a human system, designed to prevent it from happening again. Think about what that means. Somewhere upstream of that trailhead, after some earlier loss the public never heard about, a community made a deliberate decision. Visitors would not walk into this terrain alone. Not because the land is forbidden, but because the land is honest, and it does not give second chances to people who misread it. The guide requirement is not red tape. It is a memorial written in policy, a rule shaped around the outline of someone who didn't come back. He grew up near those buttes. He knows the formations by their Diné names, names that carry centuries of accumulated knowledge about where the wind shifts and where the ground holds heat longest, which draw water after a rain and which only look like they should. That is a different category of knowledge than anything that lives in a database. It was never written down because it was lived instead, passed from one person standing on this ground to another person standing on this ground, corrected by experience, paid for in advance by people who learned the hard way so that the next person wouldn't have to. He had guided hundreds of visitors safely across this terrain. At the trailhead, he didn't lecture. He assessed. He looked at Karen's water supply, not enough. He looked at her shoes, wrong soles for sandstone, the kind that slip on the slick rock and bake the soles of your feet through. He looked at the app on her phone, and he pointed in a different direction, calmly, specifically. He named a turnaround time. If they weren't heading back by that hour, the worst heat would catch them in the open. That turnaround time was the single most important piece of information anyone gave Karen that day. Not the route, not the mileage, the hour. Because in the desert, the route is negotiable and the clock is not. A turnaround time is the one number that accounts for everything the map leaves out, how fast you actually move versus how fast you plan to, how the heat compounds as the sun climbs, how much margin you have left when something goes wrong. He handed her the most valuable number in the entire system, and it was the one number her itinerary didn't have, because her itinerary had been built by something that doesn't experience time passing. He was doing precisely the job he was licensed to do. And here is the moment the story turns, because she didn't just ignore him. She told him why. She held up her phone, not aggressively. That's what makes this so hard to watch in retrospect. She wasn't rude, she was confident. She showed him the itinerary, the mileage, the timing, the water calculation, the route with its clean red arrow. She had done her research, she had receipts. The AI had given her a plan that read like a textbook, and textbooks feel true. I've already mapped this out, she told him, something close to that, certain, polite, final. Look closely at what happened in that exchange because it is the whole story in miniature. A person with lived, tested, generational knowledge of that exact ground offered it freely, and a screen, holding a plan assembled by a system that had never been there, outranked him. Not because the screen was more correct, because the screen was more comfortable. The plan in her hand had already agreed with her. The man in front of her was disagreeing. And when a confident plan meets an inconvenient expert, the human brain reaches almost every time for the thing that lets it keep going. There's a name for part of this, automation bias. The well-documented tendency to trust an automated system's output over contradictory human judgment, even when the human is right there and the human is right. It shows up in cockpits, in hospitals, in cars following a GPS into a lake. The machine's answer arrives stripped of doubt, formatted, certain, and that certainty reads to us as reliability when it is nothing of the kind. The guide spoke in the texture of real knowledge, which always includes hedges and conditions and it depends. The app spoke in the texture of a closed answer, and a closed answer, in a moment of pressure, feels like safety even when it is the opposite. The guide didn't argue. He'd seen this before, not the phone exactly, but the certainty. The visitor who arrives with a plan so detailed it feels like armor. He made one more attempt. She thanked him and turned toward the buttes. He watched her walk away. He couldn't legally follow without her consent, so he did the only thing left available to him. He picked up his phone and flagged a concern before she was out of sight. Have you ever trusted a system over a person who was standing right in front of you and later wished you hadn't? Drop it in the comments. The desert does not negotiate, and the app cannot feel the temperature rising. By 11 a.m., Karen had already slowed to half her planned pace. The sandstone beneath her feet was radiating heat she hadn't calculated for, couldn't have calculated for, because the app didn't know what radiating sandstone feels like at close range. Every step cost more than the step before it. Her water was going faster than the algorithm predicted, because the algorithm had predicted a person moving at a steady pace through steady air, and there is no such person on that rock in July. The math that looked clean on a screen was dissolving in real time against a desert that doesn't care about estimates, and the app's red arrow kept pointing forward. It had no mechanism to detect that she'd slowed, no sensor for dehydration, no awareness that the turnaround window the guide had named calmly, specifically, had already passed. It did not know the most important fact about that morning, which was that the plan had stopped being safe an hour ago. It simply kept drawing the line, because drawing the line is the only thing it does. When she tried to reverse direction, the app rerouted her. It optimized. That's all it knows how to do. It found her a new, efficient path to a destination that had already become a mistake. And it presented that path with exactly the same confidence it had shown at the trailhead, because confidence is not something it earns. It is something it is made of. At some point, she stopped moving toward the route and started moving toward anything familiar. The buttes all look the same when you're desperate. The grand, ordered landscape that had looked so navigable on a screen becomes, at ground level and in distress, a repeating maze of identical red walls. This is the precise terrain the guide carried in his body, every false trail, every place a disoriented hiker tends to drift. It was the knowledge she had been offered and declined, and now she was inside the exact problem it was built to solve without it. What would you have done in that moment? Trusted the screen, or turned back when the guide said to? Tell me in the comments. The guide was already making calls. Search and rescue on Navajo Nation land moves fast. These teams know this terrain the way most people know their own neighborhoods, every canyon, every false trail, every place a disoriented hiker tends to drift. The guide didn't wait to be asked. He joined them immediately, and he knew roughly where the app would have sent her because he understood the one thing the situation turned on. Not where she meant to go, but where a failing plan and a failing body would have carried her instead. They found her off the marked trail. She had deviated at some point, likely when the route stopped matching the ground beneath her feet. She hadn't made it back. The cause was consistent with severe heat exposure in extreme conditions. That's the whole of what needs to be said about that. This is not the part of the story to dwell on, and the dignity of what happened deserves better than detail. What stayed with the rescue team, what got quietly passed along afterward, was what the guide said when it was over. Not "I warned her," not vindication of any kind. He said he wished she had let him help. That sentence carries more weight than any statistic, because it tells you exactly who he was in this story, not a footnote she dismissed, but a person who genuinely wanted her to come home. There is no triumph in it, no I told you so, none of the satisfaction the internet would later try to manufacture out of her death. Just grief. And the specific kind of grief that belongs to someone whose whole purpose is to bring people back safely, standing at the edge of the one time he couldn't because he was never allowed to try. So what does this actually tell us about AI, about expertise, and about the story we tell ourselves when we feel prepared? ChatGPT didn't kill Karen. The hiking app didn't kill Karen. Blaming the technology misses the point entirely, and missing the point means the next person walks into the same desert with the same phone and the same certainty. What actually happened was this. Karen found a tool that would never tell her she was wrong. That's not a flaw in the design. That's the design. AI reflects your plan back to you, polished and coherent, stripped of doubt. Ask it for a route and it gives you a route. It does not first ask whether you should be going at all. It is built to be helpful, and being helpful to a system with no stake in the outcome means agreeing, smoothing your request into a confident answer, rather than standing in the doorway and refusing to let you pass. It cannot challenge your assumptions because it has no assumptions of its own and no skin in whether you survive the ones it hands back to you. It cannot look at your shoes and see the problem. It cannot feel the heat building at 10:47 a.m. and say, stop. The guide could do all of those things. That's precisely why she didn't want him. And there is a wider pattern underneath this one hike, which is why it's worth telling at all. The thing that made the AI's plan so persuasive was not its accuracy. It was its fluency. A well-structured, confidently worded answer activates the same instinct in us that a competent person does. We are pattern matching on the surface of expertise, not its substance. For almost all of human history, those two things traveled together. The person who could speak with calm, organized authority about the desert had usually earned it by surviving the desert. That link is now broken. Fluency can be manufactured at scale, divorced entirely from experience, and handed to anyone with a phone. We have not yet developed the instinct to distrust a confident answer from something that cannot be held accountable for being wrong. Karen's mistake is going to be a common one because the tool that made it is in everyone's pocket and it never once sounds unsure. This is the pattern worth sitting with, not the app, but the particular comfort of a tool that never disagrees. A good human expert is, in a real sense, defined by their willingness to tell you no. That is what their expertise is for. The guide's entire value was concentrated in the words Karen least wanted to hear. And technology has made it easier than ever to route around exactly that, to assemble a plan so detailed and so agreeable that the one voice capable of saving you sounds like an obstacle to it. Technology has made it easier than ever to feel prepared without being prepared, to hold the answer in your hand and mistake confidence for competence, to mistake the smoothness of an answer for the soundness of it. If this kind of story, the gap between what we think we know and what actually keeps us safe, matters to you, subscribe. Not for the algorithm, for the community of people who refuse to let these lessons disappear quietly. The Navajo Nation didn't require licensed guides as bureaucracy. They required them because people had already died here, and they built a human system to stop it from happening again. That system had a name and a face and a calm voice at a trailhead. It had a turnaround time and a pair of eyes that looked at her shoes and knew. She thanked him and walked away. There is a version of this trip that still exists, somewhere in the space of what could have been. Karen arrives home with her camera full. The buttes at golden hour, that particular red that exists nowhere else on Earth. She has a story about the guide who told her the DNA name for the formation she photographed and what it means and why it matters. She understands something about this place she couldn't have Googled. That trip was available to her. It was standing right next to her at the trailhead, holding a water bottle and pointing in a different direction. That's the grief underneath all of this, not just a life lost. A different life that was right there, close enough to touch, separated from the real one by a single decision made in the space of a sentence. The lesson isn't don't use AI. Use it, it's remarkable at what it does. But know with absolute clarity what it cannot be. It cannot be the man who grew up watching those buttes change color through every season of his life. It cannot hold knowledge that was never written down because it was lived instead. It cannot care whether you make it home. And when someone like that points away from your screen, quietly and without drama, that is the moment everything depends on. Put the phone down. Listen to the person who actually knows. That's what we owe them. That's what we owe ourselves.